See From Within, Heaven's Bizarre Gift by Mary G. Cavallo and Grace M. Hutchian. Narrated by TTYMTO. What if all the things you knew about the people around you is not what you think it is? This is the story of a teenage girl whose father plotted to murder her a lot of times. Discovering the father was the head of everything by getting a strange ability to see, feel, and read a person's mind and heart after an accident. She found out that he is not the only one who wanted her dead. Her feet pounded the ground. The cobblestones seemed to flee every time she stepped on them. Whatever she was running from was bigger than her, faster than her, and deadly. She could barely breathe. When she first saw the outline of the man behind her, she knew she was in a significant amount of danger. She had started walking quicker. She had done a few loops of the block, hoping that he would wander off, but it only confirmed her worst fear. He was following her. She started running. She wasn't far from her house, but she knew that she couldn't keep running forever. She would have to stop at one point. He was getting closer and closer. She could hear his labored breath behind her, feel the air from him, running, brushing the back of her neck. Mia's head was pounding. All she could hear was the distant sirens and the shouting of paramedics around her. She didn't remember much about the accident, just how she heard the crack of a skull on the floor before she felt the impact. She felt the blood rush from her head onto the pavement below. She didn't have a clue who had hit her. All she knew was that it was a man. She thought it would be safe to walk at night, especially so close to a house, but she was wrong. She grabbed onto the paramedic's arm and could feel everything he could. The panic, the anxiety. She could hear the thoughts whizzing through her head. He stared down at her and started yelling, and Mia's eyes snapped open, and her spine went straight. She woke up in a pool of her own sweat, breathing deeply. The accident had been a few months ago, but it still got to her no matter how much she tried to ignore it all. She often woke up from nightmares or had vivid flashbacks that kept her at home for days on end. Something good had come out of the accident. It could have been a blessing or a curse. She hadn't quite decided yet. She got up from her bed and wandered into the kitchen. Her father, Eddie, was making toast. It was rather early. She was never up before noon these days. "Hello, dear," he said in that normal monotone voice. "Morning, Dad." She yawned as she sat on the counter and started slurping away on a glass of orange juice. He had been acting suspicious lately. She yelped as she saw a knife digging into her leg. "Dad, be careful," she said in a frustrated tone. He sighed and picked it up. "Sorry, Mia." She nodded and texted her friend Anya. She was bored, and Anya was always in the gym at this time. Mia wasn't entirely sure how she managed to pull herself out of bed every morning and do exercise. She received a text back a few moments later and smiled warmly at her phone. Anya was on her way over with a good friend, Adrian. Anya was like a sister to Mia. She was at her house more than she was at her own. Mia didn't mind at all. A few minutes later, she heard a knock at the door and ran to it, still in her pajamas. She threw her arms around Anya and felt the sweat sticking to her. "Oh my God, didn't you shower?" she asked, holding her nose. "You have literally witnessed me throw up on your bathroom floor. I think you can deal with a little sweat," she replied. Mia laughed and nodded at Adrian, who smiled warmly at her. It had always been rather weird between the both of them. She wasn't entirely sure why he was so odd around her. Maybe it was because her and Anya were so close. She had no idea. She would often catch him looking at her across the room and staring at her. He didn't know she noticed, but she did. She longed to touch him just for a moment, so she could see what on earth was whirling around his head, but she didn't have the guts to. Ever since she had gotten the mysterious power, she had been hesitant to touch people for too long, just in case she learned something that she wasn't supposed to know. It was always a fear for her, so she held herself back. She didn't have to know what he was thinking, despite how much she wanted to. "Anya, how good to see you!" Mia's mother, Emma, trotted down the stairs, her blonde hair tied back in an elegant ponytail. "Hi," replied Anya. Mia's mother had been married before Mia's father, a man called Louis. Every time she mentioned him, her mother got ridiculously sad. She knew he had died, but it must have been pretty traumatic for her mother to shut off completely. She had tried mentioning it to her father, but he got angry. He was a rather jealous man, and knowing that his wife had been with someone else and still got upset about him must have been hard. Mia understood completely. She would never use her powers to take advantage of her family. Mia zoned out and started thinking about the accident again. Every time she heard a loud sound, it would take her back to the sound of her head smashing against the window. The crack was horrific. There were a few odd moments afterwards that she still thought about to this day. Her father was sad when she landed in hospital, while her mother was relieved. She didn't think into it too much. He was protective of her, and was probably just angry at whoever had done this to his daughter. Another odd thing that happened was Anya's reaction. She was shocked when Mia showed up to school 3 days later. "You alive?" She blurted it out in the middle of the corridor, but Mia hadn't mentioned it to anyone but her parents. She shrugged it off anyway. Her parents had probably let her know she was in the hospital. She was thinking too deeply into all of this. She was too caught up into the past and needed to focus more on the future and what her power could possibly bring her. "So, I have an idea for what we could do tomorrow," Anya said. "What's that?" Mia replied, crunching down on some toast and jam. "A double date!" Immediately, Mia started shaking her head. "You know I'm not into all that stuff," she replied. "Please? I promise. He's really nice," she said. "You said that last time, and he tried to get into my pants in the first 10 minutes. Anya laughed. "I promise. This one is different. Please? I will buy you food." Mia thought for a few moments. "Fine," she agreed hesitantly. Anya threw her arms around Mia and told her to start getting ready. A few hours later, Mia was all dressed up. She was in a gorgeous emerald green dress. Her chestnut hair was tucked behind her ears, and she had a light dusting of makeup on her face. She assumed Anya would be taking Adrian. They had grown ridiculously close over the past few months, and she honestly wanted them to get together. She just hoped the guy that Anya was bringing for her was better than the last one. She met Anya beforehand, and they walked to the restaurant. London was beautiful around this time of year. They lived right on the outskirts, far from the city. It was full of meadows and forests. The scenery was absolutely breathtaking. Brilliant sunlight shone amid infinite hues of white, the clouds ruffling in messy ripples as if it was some divine wedding, dress-crafted by Aphrodite herself. Through the glass of the icicles was the ever-changing art of the sky. The clouds that brought infinite images of majestic beauty. The landscape was such a casual beauty, transitory and eternal, changing and constant. The interesting thing about the sky in this part of London was that the clouds were white ribbons upon the velvet blue, making a half spiral as it fluttered in lofty breezes. From below they decorated the ground, like an eerie but beautiful fog. From above the clouds decorated the vast sky with pearly white, a gift of beauty to surpass any silken or woven cloth the finest tailor could make. The sun which watched over the fields was the brightest of a fresh page in the summer sun, the kind that brought a smile, even as you let your eyes rest a moment It was the sort of brightness that kindled something beautiful within, and at the same time stirred a connection with the nature around. It made the soul so vibrant it began to merge with every living thing. It was radiating, resonating, elevating. The daylight came as such intricately woven threads of gold of ethereal light that it was hard to look away, hard to pull your eyes from the wonderful sight for even a moment, scared that you would miss something. If you ventured far enough from the center of the quaint village, the beauty only increased. There were vast fields one could explore freely without worrying about the dangers of men, like Mia had to every day. In the expanse of green, there were more hues than anyone had named, yet here there were for any eye to see. Amidst the variety of greens were flowers. The blossom opened as if each flower was a book that was more sculptured than within, the ink infusing into the petals to give their soft glow. There was a tale of eons past, of the loving care of the soils, and the rain, and the sun, a tale of the insects, the soil, the city itself. The trees stood mute in the soft air, the humidity encasing every branch, every leaf. Even the birds were somewhat heavenly. There was a subtle fragrance making its way through the meadows, a distinctive aroma of leaf and soil. The grounds of the forest was lumpy with roots. They twisted like snakes, turned to stone, writhing upward one final time before descending deep into the earth to take cool draughts from the rivers below. The rivers, which wound through the canopy of trees, met the sun with such grace, as if the two of them were so enchanted by this eternal dance, that nothing in the world could possibly be wrong. They didn't even talk as they slowly plodded down the dirt paths towards the restaurant. Their shoes were muddy, but they didn't care. They loved walking through this part of town together. Everything was so relaxing. Everything was calm. It felt like nothing could go wrong, which was something Mia needed every now and then. She tended to panic if she didn't have some kind of constant calm. And while Anya did a great job, sometimes it just wasn't enough. Mia stopped in her tracks. "Damn it! I forgot my phone," she said. Anya swore. "I will meet you there, okay?" Anya nodded, texting Adrian that they were going to be late. It wasn't long before Mia got home. She tripped as she fell in the door, and her father grabbed her. She didn't mean to, but she looked into his thoughts. "I'm going to kill you. I will kill you, and this time you will surely meet your end." Mia jumped backwards. "Hey, you okay?" he asked. She was speechless, but she couldn't let him know what she knew. Not yet. She nodded, grabbed her phone, and hurried out the door. She had to get to Anya. She had to tell her friend she was in danger. But she didn't know how she would do it without exposing her powers. She walked to the restaurant, still fazed by what she had learned. Her own father wanted to kill her. It didn't make any sense. It wasn't long before she got to the restaurant. She walked in, and Anya grabbed her arm. "Are you okay? You look like you had just seen a ghost." Mia didn't want to, but she couldn't resist looking into her friend's thoughts. She could feel the anxiety and worry seeping out of her, but not for the right reasons. Mia felt tears form into her eyes. "I'm going to poison you tonight, and we are going to kill you. Me and Connor will kill you." And then all of the words started to mesh together. Rape, drugs, Adrian, poison, Eddie. "I need a second," she said. She could feel bile rising in her throat. She ran to the toilet, taking a deep breath. She heard the door open as she breathed deeply into the mirror. She looked at her reflection and saw Adrian walk in. "You can't be in here! This is the ladies' room!" "I don't care, Mia. You aren't okay. What the hell happened?" Mia turned to face him. God, he was gorgeous. "Trust me, you wouldn't believe if I told you." "Try me," he demanded. Taking a deep breath, she opened up with Adrian. Anya wants to poison us. His eyes widen. And then she wants to have a way with you. His eyes widen even more. She's going to get the guy she brought to rape me and film it, and then she's going to kill me. She's working with my father. He blinked once. I know it sounds ridiculous. No, it doesn't, he replied quietly. She stared at him, waiting for him to explain what the hell he meant. I saw her put something in my water, but I shook it off. She means for us to drink the water, and for her and Connor to have the punch. Can you distract them? Mia asked. Why? What are you going to do? Give them a taste of their own medicine, she replied, anger boiling within her. They started to set the plan into motion. Wait, Adrian said, grabbing Mia's arms. Adrian gazed at her so dearly. Unintentionally, she heard the voice from Adrian's heart trying to break free. I love you. Mia jerked her arm away. She would deal with his hidden feelings for her later. Mia told Anya that Adrian had fainted into the bathroom, and so she ran to his aid straight away. She asked Connor if he would look for her bag because she was sure she had left it in the reception, and she started switching the drinks. She ordered 2 more waters and poured the tainted ones into the punch, mixing the drugs with what Anya and Connor thought was an innocent mix. Adrian left the bathroom, Anya holding his arm. He looked at her, and she nodded slowly, letting him know that she had succeeded in their plans to drug their friends, or who they thought were their friends. Slowly, they watched Anya and Connor sip their drinks and started getting more and more tired until they collapsed onto the table. And then they left. Mia paced up and down the alleyway, pulling her hands through her hair. Mia, you need to calm down, Adrian said, reaching for her. He had unbuttoned his shirt. It was far too hot in the restaurant. Maybe it was just anxiety about what they had done. His hair was windswept, and he had held his jacket in one arm nonchalantly. Do not tell me to calm down, Adrian! Her voice was trembling. My father and my best friend are working together to kill me. She was so busy in her own world that she didn't notice him standing in front of her. Look at me, he whispered. No, She felt one of his strong hands grip her chin and pulled her head up to look at him. She felt butterflies rush through her stomach. You are going to take a deep breath from me now, okay? She breathed deeply and nodded, smiling at her. Good girl. She felt an odd feeling rush through her at those words. She looked into his motions and felt a wave of what could only be described as intensity wash through her. She moved her hands up from his stomach to his chest and smiled as she felt his breath hitch at a touch. He moved one hand to her waist, let the other one rest on her cheek. She bit her lip as she looked up at him, just like that. He lost control. Adrian dipped his head, his eyes never leaving Mia, seeking permission. Their lips were so close, she could feel his warm, steady breathing caressing her face. Her body was hot and tingly. This was it, the point of no return. If Adrian kissed her, then she would be lost. But Adrian was everything that she had ever wanted. Loyal, honorable, good, just dedicated. He was handsome. It wasn't that she had only just realized, but rather she had just processed how good he looked, basked in the moonlight. Mia knew Adrian wanted her, but there was something else in his gaze. Something Mia couldn't quite put a finger on. I don't want you to feel obligated to do this, Mia. If you are uncomfortable... But Mia closed her eyes and stretched the remaining distance. Adrian could hardly believe the feeling of finally kissing the woman he loved, the girl he had fallen for years ago. They kissed each other passionately. The moonlight seemed to applaud them as they shared the intimate moment under the stars. They felt like the only 2 people in the world, 2 sides of the same coin. Mia felt drowning in Adrian's passion. She couldn't feel more satisfied. As she tries to reciprocate Adrian's love, she felt safe. Despite everything she had learned that evening, Mia had been so scared of seeing one's mind and heart and feeling the emotions, but with Adrian, it was so beautiful. She felt his every move filled with passion and longing for her. It was overwhelming, but she loved it. Adrian gazed at her, loving every moment of the dream that had finally come true. "I'm all yours, Mia." Mia crept back into her home. Her father rushed to the door. She could see the disappointment on his face. It was the slight twitch of his eye and the tug of his mouth downwards. "What's wrong?" she asked mockingly, now with a newfound confidence. She had no idea what Adrian had instilled in her, but it had worked. "Nothing. I'm just glad you are home," he said. "Are you? Drop the good parent act, Dad," she said. Her mum came around the corner. "Mia, watch it." "So that your husband, and maybe I will." Her father looked taken aback. "That's it! You will not speak to your father that way. Apologize now." She shook her head. "I would rather die." "Go to your room now. You're grounded." Mia opened her mouth to speak, but her mother pointed up to the stairs. She walked up quickly, slamming her bedroom door. Her mother came up a few minutes later and sat on the bed opposite of her. "What is going on with you? You never act like this." "Nothing," Mia said, tears threatening to fall from her eyes if she wasn't careful with the words. "Honey, come on. Did you intend to fight?" Mia felt her mother's hand rest atop hers and took a deep breath as she felt a wall of emotions hit her. "Eddie is not your real father. Louis is." A million thoughts flowed through her head until she found herself in one of her mother's memories. Louis lay on the floor, bleeding and crying, holding onto a wound in his stomach. She could hear her mother screaming beside her, but was too frightened to move. She had never experienced anything like this before. It was almost like a lucid dream. She could move. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. "Please, God," Louis muttered through the sobs. "Protect them. Protect her." Mia felt her eyes cloud with tears as she saw her mother holding a baby, holding her in her arms. It was her, young her, as an infant. She felt her heart shatter into a million pieces. Protect them from him. Eddie. He meant Eddie. He wanted to protect them from him so desperately, but he couldn't. No matter what he wanted to do, he couldn't stop their fate. Only she could. She let herself fall to her knees as she watched her real dad. Her biological dad crumbled completely. As she watched her mother shield from her sight, she was crying both in her adult form and her infant form. It was breaking her completely. She didn't know what to do. There was nothing she could do even if she wanted to. Her breathing stopped completely as she looked at her father dead in the eye. "Don't let him win," he whispered as he drew his final breath and collapsed to the floor completely. She blinked and snapped back into the real world. Her mother's face just as solemn and worried as it had been in the dream. She felt her heart shatter even more as she stared into her mother's eyes. She got up from the bed. "He's not my dad," she muttered. Her mother went red in the face. "What do you mean?" "Louis is my dad, isn't he?" she said. Her mother didn't respond. "Isn't he?" she yelled, tears falling down her cheeks. "This isn't how I wanted you to find out. How did you know?" she asked, reaching for her hysterical daughter. "Get out," Mia said. A cold calm flooded over her. "Honey, please, get out." Her mother left her. Mia pulled herself into a ball on the floor and started sobbing into her hands. Tonight had been far too eventful. The only thing keeping her from spiraling completely was the thought of Adrian again, kissing him and feeling his hands roam her body like they had earlier that night. A couple of days, she finally got the guts to get out of her bedroom. She had been huddled up in there for a while. Every creak of a door, every footstep she heard had her on high alert. The only thing that had kept her going was the phone calls with Adrian. Hearing his voice was the only pace she had in her life. She knew she wasn't in the right headspace to do what she was about to do, but she decided to do it anyway. She picked up her phone and dialed Anya's number. Mia, I've been calling you for days now. I know what you've been planning. What? Anya asked. Mia could tell she was getting nervous. I know you plan to kill me. I know you've been working with my father behind my back, she said quietly, her voice strong and confident. I don't know what you... Don't bother lying to me, Anya. I can see everything you are feeling. She heard the phone hang up, pulled on her trainers, and stormed to Anya's house. As soon as her mother opened the door, Mia was running up the stairs. Anya was on the bed crying. What the hell is wrong with you? Yelled Mia. You don't understand! She stood up so she was eye level with Mia. You will never understand! What is there to understand? Both girls were crying now. Neither was able to keep any emotion in. Your father made me do it! Mia slammed Anya into the wall, watching as her friend crumbled completely. She stopped for a moment, because what she felt in Anya wasn't anger, sadness, or nervousness. It was pain. She felt pain. What did he do? She asked, loosening her grip just slightly. Just like that, Anya told Mia everything about how he would drugged her when she was only 14 and made her do vile, awful things on camera. He had told her that if she could kill Mia, he would give her Adrian and she could be free from him. Mia knew she shouldn't feel bad for her, but she did. Do you want to help me take him down? She asked Anya. She was hesitant at first, not sure what to make of her friend's proposal, but she nodded. They sat in silence together for a while. Nothing needed to be said anymore. Later that night, Mia was at home, typing up a plan to get back at Eddie, when Anya's mother burst into the room. Have you seen Anya? She asked. No. Why? Replied Mia, slamming her laptop shut. She packed a bag and ran off. We haven't seen her since. Mia's heart dropped, and she pulled out her phone. As soon as Anya's mother left, she dialed her number over and over. She texted hundreds of times. Tears clouded her eyes. She told her that she understood why she did what she did, and she just needed her to come back so they could end this together the right way. She needed Anya to be safe despite everything she had done to her that horrific night. She hid her phone away as Eddie walked into her room. We are going away this weekend. I think this family needs some quality time together. At first she was hesitant, but then she realized this was the perfect time to strike, to end the man that had made her life a living hell in more ways than one. The car journey was rather awkward. Nobody really spoke because Mia could sense what he planned to do. He had 3 motives for wanting her dead. He wanted to kill her mother, he wanted to kill her, and he wanted to steal the inheritance her real father had left for her. All of this for money. He wanted to kill innocent people for a sum of money he would spend in a couple of weeks. They arrived at the cabin after a few hours of being in the car, blasting music just so that she wasn't stuck in other people's heads. It was exhausting. Eddie tried to speak to Mia and try to earn her trust. Holding her hand, she took advantage to dive into Eddie's thoughts. She might get something she could use against him. Shocked by unfolding Eddie's past, she gets to realize why Eddie wanted them dead. He had gone from being a loving and loyal friend to Louis to some kind of monster. She barely recognized him now. She knew what was whirling around his head. From what she could tell, the only reason he despised Louis so much is because he believed he stole Emma, her mother, from him. His company and the money he deserves to get out of hard work. The money that was Mia's inheritance. It made sense now. Everything was starting to fall into place. The knives that were left exactly where Mia might walk into them, or the chemicals that were placed conveniently next to the cooking liquids. Mia tried to drown out the thoughts with the music, but it didn't work. She could still feel the emotions radiating off of him, slowly seeping into her own mind. All of the anger and fear and malice. She started to eel, devoured by it. So she turned up the music and pretended everything was okay. They sat at the dinner table and started eating together. Me and your father are going for a walk tomorrow, if you want to come. He's not my father, Mia replied. She saw her mother stiffen out of the corner from her eye and felt Eddie's anger radiating off of him. Mia, you will join us tomorrow. She gave her mother what could only be described as a death stare and looked back down at her plate. She knew that he had no intention of letting either of them live past dawn. She could change that. As they left the kitchen, she grabbed a kitchen knife from the mantelpiece. She needed something to protect herself with. She was dozing off in the lounge when she heard him come in. She was wide awake but didn't show it. She opened her eyes just slightly, just so she could see what he was doing. He was moving towards her like a predator hunting its prey. He had a needle in his hand. Oh, God. She gripped the knife in her pocket and waited for him to get close enough. And just like that, she leapt up and swung at him. He growled and leapt backwards. I knew it, she muttered. You wanted me dead this whole time. He laughed. Naive little girl. Her mother came in as he spoke, and her mouth dropped. Mom, don't come any closer. He plans to kill us and take my inheritance. She tried to make her run for it, and Eddie lunged at her, throwing onto the floor below Mia's feet. Mia helped pick her up and swung it for Eddie again, clipping her mother's arm. Blood started falling rapidly from the gash, and Mia reached for her mother, but Eddie was lunging for her again. He had her cornered. Just like that, her father started gasping. Someone had tied wire around his neck and started yanking him back. It was Anya. The relief was short-lived as Connor, the boy from the restaurant, appeared, pulling Anya backwards. Traitor! He yelled. Mia threw the knife, hoping and praying that Anya could catch it correctly. She cut it with flawless accuracy and swung for Connor, slitting his neck mercilessly. He gagged and gasped, holding his bleeding throat. Mia's mother cowered on the floor below her. He was cornering Anya. She had to do something before it was too late. She grabbed the fire poker and stabbed it into Eddie's leg. He roared in pain and spun around. Anya stepped over Connor's body. Mia, her mother whispered. She had opened the window and started to climb out of it. She grabbed Mia's hand and hesitantly let her. She heard Eddie scream in pain, and Anya followed them. We need to get to the cliff, she said, gasping for air, her forearm bleeding. He won't make it up there, and even if he does, we can beat him easily. Mia nodded and helped her mother run along. They could hear her panting behind them, hear the labored breath. That's when Mia realized. He was the man who attacked her all those months ago. He caught up to them quickly. By the time they had reached the cliff, he was right on their tails. Well, 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 he said. My 3 favorite ladies all in one place. Mia sneered at him, faking an injury to her leg, so he thought she was weak and vulnerable. He ran at her and she dodged him, but not before he slashed her stomach. The searing pain was killing her. She screamed out and gasped as Anya charged at him, using the knife to push him off the cliff. The sound of him hitting the ground was deafening. Slowly Mia's vision went dark, and the last thing she saw was Anya's teary face over her, begging her to stay awake. She awoke in a hospital bed, the heart monitor beating steadily next to her. Her mother was sitting in a chair beside her watching the television. Mom? Mia asked, trying not to move. You're awake. Thank God, she said. What happened? Where's Anya? Before her mother replied, she looked at her television and got all the answers she needed. Anya Dixon has pleaded guilty for the murder of 59-year-old father from London. Life sentence pending. No, Mia whispered. She took the fall for everything. You were not to say a word about what happened at the cabin to anyone. Do you understand me? Mia nodded, crying as she watched her friend get taken out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Adrian walked in the room with a remarkably large bouquet of flowers and kissed Mia on the head. Hi, darling, Mia said quietly. How are you feeling? She just nodded. He sat on the corner of the bed and handed her a picture of her and Anya. The tears were falling rapidly now. On the back of the picture was a messily scrawled note. Mia, thank you for loving me, even if I hated you. Mia bawled her eyes out, clenching at Adrian's shirt for any kind of comfort she could find. She stayed there for hours, barely moving a muscle. 7 years later, Mia walked to the police station, staring at the criminals she had to interview today. Her first task was to find out whether a man had killed his daughter. She took a deep breath as she looked at him. Everything about the man reminded her of Eddie. She didn't have to touch him to know what he had done. No emotion was radiating off of him. No anxiety, no fear, no confidence. She was dealing with a sociopath. She reached toward his hands and slowly removed the handcuffs, taking her time, delving into her deepest thoughts and desires. I killed her. I strangled her slowly. She pulled away. She couldn't bear the feeling. She pulled away. She couldn't bear the feeling. She looked at him with utter disgust and hatred as she whispered to her lieutenants, "Guilty." They pushed the man out of the room. She was always right. Nobody knew how she did it, but she could always guess what they did and how they did it before any evidence came to light. She started at the empty chair. She thought fondly of her old friend Anya. I see from within.